Ben Bradley, yes.
Thanks, George. Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship for the second time today, and thank you to my honourable friend, the member for North West Durham, for bringing forward this debate, which is hugely important. I'm going to touch on, focus on education today, but I also totally agree with what he said about the apprenticeship levy and the opportunity, by making that more flexible, to open up a whole range of employment and training opportunities for people that don't currently exist, and we should definitely have done that a long time ago, to be honest. There are two things I wanted to raise today. The first is helping people to access teaching as a career, regardless of your background. I think an insistence on degree qualifications makes for a less diverse workforce, not in terms of diversity of physical characteristics, which the Minister will know I have all sorts of issues with that I'll come to in a minute, but in diversity of background, views and experience. Other areas of education are free, like independent schools and colleges, to bring in a broader range of teachers and lecturers with different backgrounds. And we regularly see colleges bringing in people from industry, for example, into teaching settings. That's sometimes to support more vocational or technical qualifications. Sometimes it's to support and advise on business or getting into private sector roles and entrepreneurship. I often hear businesses say that schools struggle to teach effectively about being in business, about that entrepreneurship, about being work-ready and expectations for private sector employment, which in reality are less and less about your qualifications and more about your engagement and your character and your extracurricular interests. So many groups and charities are working to get more business experience into schools, which is good, but even better, we could get that experience into teaching. And having a wider variety of routes and ways to get into teaching without having to take years out to go and do a degree would be incredibly beneficial. Giving schools more flexibility to employ a wider range of people would also be beneficial, and that would help us to give our young people a wider range of options, as my honourable friend from North West Durham said, and a wider and better range of careers advice. Often the most effective role models for young people are those from their same community. If a young person who grew up on an estate and has done well and is capable and engaging and understands the local context and issues is perhaps better placed than a graduate from another very different area to mentor young people, to be a role model. And often people get to grips with learning and qualifications later in life, having struggled at school, particularly in very disadvantaged communities where levels of post-16 qualifications can be very low. But being able to access teaching through apprenticeships, through shorter courses to transition from other sectors, like business, for example, working as a TA while you learn and qualify on the job. Those kinds of opportunities would help people be able to get on, to give back to their communities and to teach where they grew up instead of going and doing something else elsewhere. I'd extend this to other professions as well. The police, for example, I would make the same case there, but I don't have time to go into that today. But in other areas of education, having new ways into teaching could be hugely beneficial and create new opportunities as well. Just last week I visited Crocodile Rock Daycare, an early years setting in Mansfield, where we spoke about a variety of things, including the challenge of recruiting and retaining staff. We spoke about the challenge of offering appropriate training and development with very tight budgets, and that many staff in the sector end up moving into retail or go and work at Amazon because it's better money. But if those young people entering early years education could progress into primary teaching, for example, by learning on the job, by transferring their training and qualifications in early years to schools through apprenticeship-type options, you could open up a whole world of new opportunities and also improve recruitment and retention in the sector. If people could progress from an entry-level role in early years to become more experienced and qualified, ultimately to work in a nursery or reception setting at a school, to learn on the job, gain experience with older children, to learn as a teaching assistant or and become an NQT, and do that on the job, that would mean people didn't have to take career breaks in order to requalify. It removes financial barriers. It means they could progress in settings within their own community that they most care about, and they might then want to teach in their own area and not leave and go somewhere else. And that's a real challenge for schools, particularly in disadvantaged communities. So I hope the Minister will take those points away, and I fully support what the member for North West Durham has said. In the short time I've got left, the second thing I want to raise briefly with the Minister is the importance of male role models in teaching, and relate that back to this teacher training issue. He will know, and I don't need to go into my issues with the Equality Act and the perverse outcomes that it leads to, because we'll find countless examples of trying to support women into university or into STEM, for example, next to no examples of trying to support young men into teaching, even though the profession is 75% female, and even more so in primary education. In the East Midlands, 30% of schools do not have a single male teacher. And I think that's really upsetting, actually, when you consider in some of the most disadvantaged communities that male teacher might be the only decent role model that a young man has. And how difficult is it to learn how to be a man in a modern society that makes that very confusing and difficult when you don't have a male role model, or your male role model at home is involved, for example, in domestic violence, or they're not healthy relationships, where do you learn those things from? So I'd ask my honourable friend the Minister also to take that away and to look at how we might encourage more male role models for those children in those disadvantaged communities who most need them. Most importantly, as my honourable friend from North West Durham has said, to open up that access to teaching to a much broader range of people and make that easier for all of our communities.